Let's look at what's new in the latest release of Lightroom Desktop and Lightroom for Mobile. This is the December 2024 release of Lightroom on Desktop version 8.1 and Lightroom on Mobile version 10.1. There are some new features for external editing. If you right-click on a photo and go to Edit in Photoshop, now there are three options. Edit in Photoshop was already there. Now you can send more than one image to Photoshop from Lightroom. You can open as a smart object in Photoshop, and you can open your photos as layers in Photoshop. So first I'm going to edit in Photoshop just like before. I'm going to add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer and brighten this photo up a little bit. And let's say I'm going to add a hue and saturation. I'm going to sample this color back here, magenta, and increase the saturation on it. Something to point out here is that an image will not return to Lightroom without a save and close from Photoshop. So I'm going to save this image and then I'm going to close the image. So this will send it back to Lightroom. Now here's the original and here's the edited version. So this is something to keep in mind. Lightroom needs to remain open while you're making your edits in Photoshop to allow your edit to transfer back to Lightroom. So keep Lightroom open to export your work back to Lightroom. Your file's layers will be preserved as long as no edits are made in Lightroom. So another feature for external editing is now you can send more than one file to Photoshop at a time. So I have these two images right here, both selected. I'm gonna right click and say Edit in Photoshop, and here they both are. I'm going to add a color lookup just to make an edit and change this opacity here. I'll do the same thing to the other file. I'll add a color lookup adjustment and choose one of these LUTs. I'm going to drop the opacity and the effect here. Lightroom is still open and I'm going to save this image. I'm going to close it. Here it is right here in Lightroom. And go back to Photoshop. I'm going to save this image and close it. And it is here back in Lightroom also. So that's new. Two images were sent to Photoshop. So in this next image, I'm going to right click, and this time clicking on Edit in Photoshop, open as Smart Object in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you will see the photo in the Layers panel with a Smart Object icon. Because it's a Smart Object from Lightroom, if you double click on that, it will take you to Camera Raw, and now I can make some adjustments. I can use the texture to smooth the skin a little bit of clarity, maybe add a vignette. I'm going to sample the magenta here and bring up the saturation just a little bit and say OK. So I'm going to say save and close. And here are the two files. Here's the one I just edited in Photoshop as the Smart Object. There's the original. So that's the Smart Object option. So now the last new feature for external editing, I have these three landscapes selected. I'm going to right click, go to Edit in Photoshop, and open as layers in Photoshop. I have all three layers selected, and I'm going to come up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. We're going to make a pano here. I'm going to choose Auto. Under Lens Correction, I'm going to check Vignette Removal and Geometric Distortion and say OK. And then I'm going to go back up to Edit and say Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to select Panorama, Seamless Tones, and Colors is checked, and so is Content Aware Fill, Transparent Areas, and say OK. The margin ants that you see is the area that was filled in with Content Aware. Let's say Command D, and here is my pano. Now I'm going to say File, Save, and Close. Here's my pano back in Lightroom. So that was an example of selecting three photos in Lightroom and opening as layers in Photoshop. And I just created a pano as an example. Again, I saved and closed and it came back into Lightroom. And that's what you see right here. There are also improvements to lens blur. So I'm going to apply this lens blur here, and you can see the lights behind the model are a lot blurrier. There's the before and there's the after. And of course you can adjust the blur amount and bokeh boost. But what the improvement is, we have a new bokeh shape on the far right called anamorphic bokeh right here. If I boost the blur amount a little bit, if I take this cat eye control and bring it more to the right, you can see the shape of the bokeh changing, getting more like the new anamorphic bokeh See that? So that's an improvement here in Lightroom. There are also additional lens blur adaptive presets. If you click on the preset browser and under premium, under adaptive blur background, you have all these new presets. You can see as I'm hovering over them, they're changing the different blur effects. And say, for instance, if I click on ring and then I change the amount slider, you see it changes more to a ring. So these are adaptive blur presets. And at the bottom, there's a reset blur. Just click on that and all the effects go away. Another improvement is you can use generative remove after cropping. Before, if you cropped and used generative remove, cropped pixels were still there and might cause the results you weren't expecting. I'm going to click on the crop. Let's go 16:9 and just bring this in a little bit on both sides just for an example here. And so intentionally I'm over here cropped near this post and we'll crop it right there. We'll click on the remove icon here. I'm going to make sure that use generative AI is checked, and I'm going to adjust my brush size here, and I'm going to get rid of this post little by little. I'm going to click remove. Let's get rid of the remaining part of the signal right here and click remove again, and it did a pretty good job. So before, you probably would have had unpredictable results on the left-hand side, and the object that you were trying to remove were right next to each other. So now that has been taken care of. So now you can see that you have some good results when you crop and then use generative remove. And here we have some smaller changes. If you want to refine the search, you can now filter by extension. That is new. Also, for a photo like this, if you go down to info, there are two new fields, the alt text and the extended description. So whatever browser or application that supports these, you will see the alt text and or extended description. If you go up to Adobe Lightroom, Preferences, under Interface, there's something called Enable Third-Party Controllers. So when I click that, enable it, and say done. If I have a loop deck controller, it will now be supported in Lightroom. Here the page says Adobe Lightroom Classic, but it is also going to be Lightroom when you check that option, or something like the Elgato Stream Deck that will also be supported by Lightroom when you click that option. Comment below on which of these features you are looking forward to using. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content on Lightroom. Remember, it's never too late to learn. Thanks for watching.